welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dominic Frangelo, co-founder and executive director of Elected Officials to Protect America. Welcome to our webinar on clean transportation funding opportunities in New York State. So EOPA, just a little bit of background, is a national network of state and local elected officials across the country committed to solving the climate emergency, ensuring environmental justice, and protecting our land, water, and air. And we did start as elected officials to protect New York more than a decade ago. And our core principles are threefold. Ones that we believe that elected officials are stewards of the public, taking care of our communities, our democracy, and our future. That courageous leadership, that we count on our elected officials when crises come up, like the climate emergency, like environmental justice, that affects our communities to pursue a solution to those problems and step up and lead. And then lastly, collective power, that by joining together across jurisdictions, municipalities, states, at every level of office, we have the power collectively to help lead the transformation for our state and for our country. So we're super excited to have you today, and we have some amazing speakers who are going to speak to us on a very timely topic on funding opportunities for clean transportation at the state level and a breakdown of the funding at the federal level. And just a little context that according to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, we need to cut emissions by 85% by 2050 for New York to meet its climate goals. And that record funding coming down from the IRA is really important, particularly for the transportation sector, which is the largest share of emissions for the state, 47% of the state. And unlike other sectors, we are not reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it's continuing to increase. So we really have a historic opportunity with the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and other federal funding, $369 billion in climate funding. And we have a real opportunity to combine that with state funding, federal funding, to help our communities transition to clean, equitable transportation. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our first speaker, who's a climate analyst at the New York Department of Conservation in the Office of Climate Change. Myra, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on your lunchtime. I'm going to be sharing my screen here. Theoretically, you should see my screen now, and I will be telling you a little bit about our programs here at DEC that, sorry, I'm having a problem with the, all right, there we go. I got it. So apologies. I will be telling you a little bit about our, well, mostly our DEC's municipal zero emission vehicle program. I'm also going to get into a little bit of our Climate Smart Community certification program and a little bit of the Climate Smart Communities grants and how they relate to clean transportation. But our big clean transportation project at the Office of Climate Change is this municipal ZEV program. You know, as we've been talking about, there is, a statewide initiative around supporting EVs in New York State. There's a lot of agencies and authorities involved. This is just one program. There's a whole lot of other programs through NYSERDA and NYPA, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole idea is to support the growth of the EV market in the state, get the charging stations installed, get people driving the cars and using the stations, and also to help us meet our big greenhouse gas emission reductions under the Climate Act. Here at DEC, we focus mainly on municipalities. The other programs focus on different sectors of the state, businesses, et cetera. And we focus solely on municipalities with two different programs. One is vehicle rebates, and the other one is infrastructure grants. And then, again, I'll get into a little bit about climate smart communities at the end of this presentation. So the municipal ZEV rebate, the eligible applicants are cities, counties, towns, and villages. This program will support purchase or lease of new all-electric plug-in hybrid or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for fleet use. The vehicles must be passenger vehicles. They must be placed into service at a New York State dealership. And it is a true rebate in that the purchase must be made before the application for the rebate is completed. Some municipalities like to do like the aggregate purchasing programs, and typically that's okay, except that you need to get whoever's running the aggregate purchase to run the vehicles through a New York State dealership. If you have them drop shipped right to the municipality, unfortunately they don't qualify. We do have to have the New York State dealership as an intermediary, so keep that in mind. The set of rebates range from a minimum of $2,500 to a maximum of $7,500 per vehicle. Depends on the range. The more range you have, the bigger rebate you're going to get. And then we have a new category of the 8,000 to 14,000 pound vehicles, which are the sort of mid-sized trucks and some vans. All of those receive a $7,500 rebate because the range really varies a lot in that category. Funding is first come, first served because it is a rebate program. You know, you buy the vehicle, you apply. As long as you have all the paperwork and the car qualifies, you'll get the rebate. So we make them on a rolling basis while the opportunity is open. A municipality can submit one application for multiple vehicles. That is fine. The second program is our infrastructure grants. Again, county, city, town, and village are eligible. And this is to purchase and install either level 2 or DC fast charge stations, as well as components of hydrogen fuel cell stations. If one is going to consider a hydrogen fuel cell station, be advised that the hydrogen must be produced through electrolysis or biogas reformulation. Those are the only two that are eligible. The MWBE program does apply to the infrastructure grants, especially if you have an electrician or a general contractor doing some of the work. There is also updated guidance out for how the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to both the accessibility of the station and the accessibility of the parking space. I do have a link for you regarding that on the last page, on the last slide. So if you're thinking of installing these things, take a look at that. As far as infrastructure grants goes, almost any expense is eligible. The equipment, the installation, the site preparation, any utility upgrades that you need that are related directly to that station. 2 years of electricity can be billed towards the grant if the municipality is offering the charging station for free. So if you're not charging the users, you can bill the electricity to the grant. If you are charging the users a fee to charge, then you can't bill the grant for electricity. If you're putting the charging station into a paid parking garage, let's say, and you're charging for parking, but you're not charging for charging, then you can still bill us for the electricity. And again, 2 years of networking and warranty fees are also included. Personnel and in-kind supplies and materials, everything's eligible. There is a local match for this program based on the median household income of the municipality and the location. If these stations are placed in locations that are in disadvantaged communities, there's no match. And then there's a variable match. If you're putting it outside of a disadvantaged community, there's a variable match. So if you're at or above the median household income for New York State, 20% match. If you are in the that 90%, 80 to 100% of the median household income, there's a 10% match. And if your MHI for your municipality is below the state's MHI, then you also have 0% match. However, the utility make ready funding is funding that is through the utilities. It's not state funds, it's not federal funds, therefore it can be used as match. So even if as a municipality you have a 10 or 20% match, you could still potentially get a station installed for no cost if you're also going to utilize make ready. Make ready is done through the utilities, and if you just Google utility make ready program, you'll find the information about each program and each utility in each portion of the state. So a few things to keep in mind about the infrastructure grants is that the statute that governs the program requires that the grantee guarantee that the station is usable and accessible for a minimum of 10 years. So you must keep that kind of a little bit of long-term maintenance and accessibility in mind when you plan for this. The infrastructure does need to be available primarily for public use, and some limited fleet use is acceptable if you submit a shared use plan with your application. Also, majority of the ports that are installed do have to be dedicated to public use. So if you're going to put in one charging station with two ports, both of those ports have to be for the public. If you're going to put in two charging stations with 4 ports, 3 of them have to be public and 1 can be for fleet use. And when you start getting into 3 stations with 6 ports, you'll want at least, you'll want 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them for the public, and then 1 or 2 of them for fleet charging. So whatever way you slice it, it has to be a majority available to the public. It can't be 50-50. And if you are going to do any kind of like fleet use mixing with your public charging stations, you do have to have the information posted on the site with your municipal parking information and on your municipal website so that users are aware of which ports that they have access to. Again, this program is somewhat first come, first served. It does have a deadline and all the applications are reviewed at the deadline. We do give preference to applications that have their stations cited in areas with disadvantaged community per the Climate Act. The maximum award for an infrastructure grant is $250,000. If it's outside a disadvantaged community, if it's in a disadvantaged community, the maximum award is $300,000. Charging hubs are okay. So if you want to put in 6 stations or 10 stations or 20 stations, it's possible. However, the maximum award per municipality across all sites is $500,000. This zero emission vehicle program is run through the New York State Grants Gateway. So applications are found on the Grants Gateway. You apply through the Grants Gateway. We do contracting through the Grants Gateway. The last year's RFA is still posted on our website. So if you want to go to this link and take a look at last year's request for applications, you can find all the details and all the requirements. If you have any questions, send us an email. Someone will get back to you as soon as we can. So far we've had 6 rounds of funding between 2016 and 2022. We've awarded over $16 million, which has supported the purchase of 114 plug-in hybrids, 182 all-battery electrics, 3 hydrogen fuel cell nozzles, 1,076 level 2 ports, and 44 DC fast charge pedestals. So moving on to the Climate Smart Community Certification Program. Most of you have probably heard of this. In case you have not, the certification program it's a framework program that was developed to help local communities organize their action for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So essentially, communities complete actions, they get points. When you get a certain number of points under a certain set of actions, you gain a certain type of certification. You have registered, you have bronze certified and silver certified. Essentially, it's a recognition of local leadership, and you get this nice little sign you can hang up in your community if you like. And the way that intersects with the ZEV program is that there are pledge element actions related to zero emission vehicles. You got a fleet inventory, a fleet efficiency policy, fleet right sizing, and the purchase of advanced vehicles. So all of these, you can earn points if you're going for certification. You can earn points doing all these things. The first 2 actions, the fleet inventory and the fleet efficiency policy, are actually fundable through the Climate Smart Communities grant program. That's a separate program from the ZEV program. That program typically runs through, well, it always runs through the consolidated funding application, which typically opens in May. So sometime next month, this opportunity should be available, and you can apply to do fleet inventories and fleet efficiency policy if you'd like. Another component related to clean transportation of the Climate Smart Communities grants is our reducing vehicle miles traveled category. So in this category, we support on-road or off-road facilities for non-motorized transportation. Your bike trails, your walking trails, your sidewalks. The caveat is that we don't fund recreational trails. Like the sidewalks or the walking lane or whatever has to help people meet their daily needs. You know, we want folks to be able to get from their neighborhood to their job, from their job to the pharmacy, from the pharmacy to the doctor, from the doctor back home. So be able to make trips without cars, essentially. Mass transit improvements are also included, and so are individual projects to reduce the distance people commute, either through densification or smart growth, et cetera, et cetera. That one has a lot of room for massaging into whatever kind of project you're thinking of doing. So that is our 2 grant programs and our different programs for related to clean transportation. The ZEV rebate email is where you can write to us to ask questions about the 2 ZEV programs. The CSC grants emails where you can write to us for questions about the grants program, the Climate Smart Communities grants program. And also I'll mention that last year's RFA is still on the website. So if you have any interest, you want to go download that, take a look at it real quick, you can do that. Again, that's the link to our climate change office funding page, the New York State Grants Gateway, the Climate Smart Communities portal. This is where you can find information on the certification actions. You can also see what communities are certified, what communities are registered. You can pull down a report of the actions that they've done to get an example of what they submitted as documentation. And then this last link is the ADA guidance for the charging stations in the parking lots. So I want to take a look at that. And that is all I have today.
This climate change in New York DC and expertise managing these programs, which are obviously critical, and I know will be interesting to a lot of our elected officials across the state who, if they haven't heard of these programs, are a really good opportunity to help with the transition to clean vehicles and clean transportation. Well, thanks so much. And we will take questions at the end. So feel free to put in your questions in the chat or in the questions. I think, Duncan, you'll send instructions on how to do questions. And then we, with no further ado, will move to our next speaker, Myra Donadio, who's the Assistant Sustainability of Clean Energy and Climate Smart Communities Outreach at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. And we're very excited to hear about your perspective on the local level of opportunities to make the transition to clean transportation. Take it away, Tara.
Great, thank you so much. The usual setup time. Let's just get this rolling. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to kind of piggyback here on what Myra was talking about, but also some other opportunities through the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities program as well, and how the state has provided kind of this resource at a local level, regional level, I should say, for municipalities to engage in these programs for free. So I'm Tara Donadio. I'm the Assistant Director of Sustainability at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. So I'm hosted here in the Capital Region, providing this free technical support, but you'll see that there are many like me throughout New York State that can do the same thing as me in potentially your region. So you'll see this map here. This is the Clean Energy Communities program with NYSERDA, which is a program for municipalities to engage in clean energy actions and basically provide free technical support as well as grants in these programs. So the coordinators are very similar, at least in most cases, the same agency that's managing the climate smart technical support as well. And a lot of the actions do overlap. So so this is the full list. This can be found at this link here on the website to see who your kind of local organization is, usually a regional planning commission or you know, some other type of regional entity is providing this information. So what we do is we provide free technical assistance. We can provide free consulting services to understand the state programs. We do a lot of educational seminars and training for all things clean energy and climate smart, which also focuses on some clean transportation stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So just taking a step back for a second on what these programs are, Myra did a very good overview on the Climate Smart Communities program. That program, there are DC grants available that she mentioned. There are points and recognition for certification. It's a very robust program. It definitely needs community engagement to be certified. And then there's actions related to EVs and EV infrastructure and EV planning and those types of things. The NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities program provides match-free grants to communities. It's a bit, you can get designated in just 4 actions. So it's a, kind of a achievable goal for communities that are just kind of starting with this work to kind of get some grants to further fund other opportunities going forward. So, and there's a clean fleets action. So looking at EV charging and EV fleets. So the NYSERDA program itself has a bunch of different actions in it that communities can undertake to reduce their energy use, reduce greenhouse gases, save money. And this is the kind of full list of the actions. But again, I'm just going to focus on the 3 that are highlighted there, and basically how a community would achieve those actions and then therefore get the points towards grants for these actions. So the first action is clean fleets, EV charging stations. So with this action, if a community installs either a level 2, 2 level 2, charging points, or 1 or more DC fast charge ports, they would get points in this program. They have to own or lease the equipment, which is, pretty much the option. So, and then basically just have to prove that they've installed it. It's pretty simple. This is points towards larger grants in the program. You can see a few examples here of some fast chargers and some level 2 ports at stations. The next action is clean fleets, electric vehicles and heavy duty electric vehicles. So similar name, but kind of, you can also do this one in addition to the other one. So it's not either or. If you purchase a light or medium duty electric vehicle, you get points in the program. It has to be plug-in hybrid or battery electric hybrid, or a heavy duty vehicle, you get even more points in the program. So this is class 7 or 8 plug-in hybrid or battery electric vehicles. So yeah, just some examples there. A lot of communities, of course, are starting with the light medium duty vehicles. They're more affordable. They're more available generally. Some of the heavy duty needs are coming down the pike. And I think there's communities out there that are definitely starting to explore this and use the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program, which kind of provides some funding for this large vehicle transition as well. So there's definitely some incentive there to kind of look into this. So, a lot of times when we present this to a municipality, it's why should, we think about EV infrastructure? Why should we purchase EV fleets? Or, what's besides the Climate Act, of course, which we all understand, what's the kind of benefit to us to think about doing these actions? So there's a really cool tool on NYSERDA's website where you can see the EV registrations in your community. So I've zoomed in here on Albany County. You can see here that there are, according to the registrations, 3,373 EVs on the road in the county. You can also see the level 2 ports and the DC fast charge ports, the locations of ports. So in this case, the county itself could look at that and say, okay, we've got this many people driving EVs. There's definitely a demand here. Here's maybe the location we should put it in based on other infrastructure. So just kind of giving you some data on, what the EV registrations are in your community. So you can see that it's not too crazy to think about EVs. And I think we're all realizing that now is even more so than 5 years ago. And then on the right here, we've got kind of the fleet transition question for communities is like, what is the benefit to me doing this? And this data is a few years old now, so the numbers might have changed a little bit. I wasn't able to find really an updated study, but you can see the total cost over 9 years of going, all electric versus a traditional gas vehicle is actually cheaper when you take into the case maintenance and all of the other things that you need to have on a gas vehicle, oil changes, all of that other really fun stuff. So, it's really a long-term kind of savings, even though it may be a little bit more expensive up front. And I think that's a big piece that needs to get communicated. There's this other really cool tool that I wanted to share. The DOE has this advanced vehicle search. You can look at vehicles by manufacturer, light duty, medium duty. You can kind of figure out what, vehicle fits for your fleet needs and do some research on it. So, and I think this is going to align well with some of the federal grants that are coming down, with the Inflation Reduction Act and all of that, and kind of understanding which vehicles are eligible for certain rebates and those types of things. So, but right now it's just a really good tool to kind of just do some research and understand what's out there. So Myra touched on this, but the actions related to EV charging stations and the Climate Smart Communities program do overlap quite a bit. So again, this is a program that's a certification program for municipalities. That cool map there shows all of the communities that have done Climate Smart Communities, clean fleets type actions in New York State. There are plenty of them, and I think more to be announced, hopefully even today is what we're hearing. The newest Climate Smart Communities will be announced. So there's, some actions beyond EV fleets and EV charging infrastructure. There's things like doing a fleet inventory, just kind of understanding what your fleets are, fleet efficiency policies, and of course, just reducing your fleet size overall. So looking at bigger picture items. So in addition to all those other things that I just mentioned that we can support as regional coordinators, so we can help you kind of navigate all of those action items, understand what you need to submit, get some vendors, understand stuff. We can also help with grants. So we can help you figure out how to find money to do those things for free. So that's a big piece for small communities that don't have a lot of money to provide to get consulting and services and things like that. So speaking of those ZEV grants that Myra just mentioned, they're a heavy lift sometimes for small communities that don't have a lot of staff. So we can kind of jump in and help you kind of do some of the planning work. So on the right here, you'll see some of the work I did for a small community that was just trying to get their ZEV grant, and they're a disadvantaged community, or they were putting their station in a disadvantaged tract. So I helped them with some of just the general mapping, nothing too crazy, some screenshots, making sure that they knew where to find the right documents, kind of thinking through this process with them. And they were able to thankfully get the money in that very competitive process. In addition to the ZEV grants, ZEV rebates, there's the utility make ready grants that Myra mentioned through National Grid, through NYSEG. Central Hudson, wherever your utility may be. We are hearing that the NYSERDA Charge Ready grants, which were so very popular that they dried up last year, or maybe even 2 years ago now, I'm losing track of time, are coming back. And those are wonderful because they go beyond municipalities. So businesses can apply for those. It's kind of just like a reimbursement grant of $4,000 per port, or at least that's what it was. So it's a bit easier for more easily accessible and less waiting time for those grants. And then the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Program grants. So back to those points I mentioned in the beginning for doing things, you can also get grants for doing those things that you can then use towards EV charging stations and fleets. So then those are all match free. And that can be a lot of money for a community to consider doing this type of stuff. So this is just more about kind of the grant support we provide. Myra was mentioning how there's these matches for the ZEV infrastructure grant. We did some analysis at CDRPC of understanding those communities that this is the map of the draft disadvantaged communities here on the right. Understanding those communities that had disadvantaged community or tract within them and helping them understand that they could potentially fund free charging stations, no match charging stations in those areas. And also the MHI information, so their median household income information with some of the census data that we were able to get. And you can see there that Albany County's median household income is $66,000. So they would qualify for, looks like the 10% match, as opposed to a 20%, which is a savings for a community. So to kind of sum it all up and understand how communities can do this kind of work, I'm going to highlight Albany County and their success with kind of leveraging these grants to transition their fleet and install charging stations, which is just a great example of really just finding the money, using it, and making this transition in a time where there's a lot of money available. So thinking about the fact that there may not always be these wonderful funds for this type of stuff. And now's the time to think about getting there. So just some highlights here. In 2018, the county received Clean Energy Communities designation, and they got $280,000 in the first round of that program. They purchased 5 electric vehicles and 2 charging stations for the MVP Arena parking garage, which is, for those not local, just like kind of the big arena in the area. In 2021, the county unveiled a new request for proposals for county fleet inventory and electrification plan. In 2022, they installed 14 new public charging station ports. These were level 2s, and they were actually just awarded $66,000 for these stations through the ZEV grant. So congrats to them on that. You know, and they're all throughout the county. And then 2022, the Department of Health, or they installed 2 at the Department of Health for public use, 1 for county vehicle charging. And this was funded by the Charge Ready grant that I mentioned, and the National Grid Make Ready, which you can combine. And then 2022, the state of the county committed to converting the county's light duty fleet to electric by 2030. And they procured a bunch of light duty EVs and 4 Ford Lightnings and 8 Chevy Bolt EUVs. And then most recently, they've gotten $30,000 under the newest round of the Clean Energy Communities program. And they're purchasing a new electric van for the County Hall of Records. So I didn't add up all of those dollars, but you can see there's quite a bit of money there that they got from state grants. A lot of that match free to do this type of work. So if they can do it, I think any community can really do this type of stuff. And you know, again, we are here to help, and we can kind of help you kind of guide you through this process and understand the grants and the matches and where you could put them and the opportunities. So feel free to call on us. And that is all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tara, for sharing your presentation with us, and really helpful to see the Albany case study at the end. We've got a number of folks from Albany County and the city of Albany on the call. And I think it was also found it really interesting to see the dashboard of EV status in the community as well. That's a very interesting tool. I think will be useful for a lot of municipal folks. And your comment too about though the cost of EV infrastructure is more higher up front, it's cheaper over the long term compared to fossil fuels, and certainly for our planet. So it makes a compelling policy case. Wonderful. I see a number of questions in the chat. We will get to those after our next and final speaker, who we will transition to now. We will hear from Giancarlo Valdetaro from Transportation from America. Giancarlo is a policy and outreach associate, and we'll discuss some of the current transportation programs, particularly at the federal level, and what that means for New York State, before helping us understand how municipalities can take advantage of some of these opportunities. So I hand it over to you, Giancarlo.
Thanks, Dominic, and thank you for that introduction and the opportunity to be here today, especially as somebody who went to undergrad at Cornell up there in Tompkins County. It's nice to be able to talk to the entire state of New York, as opposed to just the New York City metropolitan area. So I'm here today to talk about clean transportation funding opportunities in New York. Like Dominic said, my name is Giancarlo Valdetaro. I'm a policy and outreach associate at Transportation for America. We are a project of Smart Growth America, which has the motto, we envision a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that is healthy, prosperous, and resilient. We pursue this goal through three main methods. That's technical assistance, advocacy, and thought leadership. And we have three main principles at Transportation for America that guide our policy advocacy and our thought leadership. The first of those is to prioritize maintenance over expansion. The second is to design for safety over speed. And the third is to connect people to jobs and services, not just focusing on vehicle throughput. So today I'm going to talk about our current transportation paradigm, the recent major transportation legislation that's been passed, the implications for New York State of this federal legislation, and how you can best take advantage of the funding that is available now. So speaking of our current transportation paradigm, right now, I'd say we are at the end of the interstate era, which is when in the United States, transportation planning focused not on moving people as effectively, efficiently, and sustainably as possible to where they needed to go, but on moving vehicles as quickly as possible and as many of them as possible, no matter where you were or what the needs of a particular location were. And that's because transportation planners across the country had forgotten what should be the guiding question for this profession. Who are we designing for? Are we designing for vehicles, or are we designing for the people that are inside vehicles during their journey? And then, and this is crucial, always get out of vehicles at the end of their journey. No matter where you are going, you're going to be outside of the vehicle at the beginning and end of your trip. And that's important to emphasize because it's impossible to prioritize both speed for vehicles and safety for people, especially in complex urban and suburban environments. And in this current transportation paradigm, we've forgotten that we are also misaligning our priorities. We give states and localities a tiny pittance of money that's dedicated to repairs of our existing transportation infrastructure, and then give states huge bags of funds, just like this cartoon shows, to do whatever they want with. And, that is a big part of the reason that there are crumbling roads all over this country, while agencies like NYSDOT are going to expand highways in the meantime. In addition, it's why we talk about this current paradigm that we're in, and this misalignment of priorities is why we talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the same time that we're talking about highway expansion. And this is where I say that although electrifying the cars that you and I would use to do our daily activities sounds great and feels great, it is not the most effective, and nowhere near the most impactful way that we're going to reduce emissions. The biggest thing that we could do is reduce highway expansions, electrify trucks and buses, as well as other heavy-duty vehicles, and then focus on transit, electrifying freight, and making sure that the infrastructure we do have is actually in good shape. If we continue expanding highways at our current rate, we are going to just increase emissions. And this is very easy to do, to expand highways under our current transportation funding paradigm, because right now, 80% of federal money is basically earmarked for highways only. That doesn't mean you can't use these funds for good things, but it does mean that there's kind of a set ratio going into any negotiations where 80% of the money is going to highways and only 20% is going towards transit and active transportation. Now, there are a couple pieces of major transportation legislation that have been passed recently. The first of those is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the IIJA, and sometimes called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It had a huge increase in funding levels across the board for highways, for transit, and for rail infrastructure. However, it made minimal changes to the way that we spend this money. And by that, I mean that the core programs that determine how this highway money gets spent was basically preserved. So there were some calls for states to prioritize maintenance coming from the Federal Highway Administration. They were toothless in the first place, and they've since been retracted. In addition, there are some road safety targets and targets for how states have to spend their money, but otherwise states are basically able to do whatever they want with formula funding. In addition, there is still little to no operating support for transit agencies across the country, something that many of them, especially those in bigger cities, are dealing with right now as they face a fiscal cliff or a fiscal doom, you might say. There are some incremental positive changes, I will say. For example, there is a small amount of money set aside in formula funds for complete streets planning. For the most dangerous states, they're also forced to spend 15% of one pot of money, and it's a comparatively small pot of money, on safety investments. In addition, Amtrak's mission was changed to be focusing on the entire nation as opposed to prioritizing the Northeast corridor. But it's important to remember that these are Band-Aids on gaping wounds in our transportation program overall at the federal level. When we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, it's important to note that energy supply is receiving about half of these resources, especially clean manufacturing and housing, and that the biggest part of this funding is available as tax credits to businesses. Therefore, there's a lot of private sector green stimulus, such as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the Alternative Fuel Refueling Property Credit. There's also a doubling down on electric vehicles of all types. There's some stuff for heavy duty vehicles and buses, which I mentioned are especially important, as well as tax credits that are targeting corporate and freight fleets, in addition to some clean vehicle credits that allow for fuel cell and high-end used vehicles. But there's still a lot left to interpretation. For example, with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and that refueling credit that I mentioned earlier, are they going to include location efficiency initiatives so that even if you're using an electric vehicle, you don't have to drive as far? Because either way, if you're going really far to meet your basic needs, like the grocery store or going to a doctor's appointment, that is still more inefficient than a place where you can walk or roll in some shape or form to those basic needs. In addition, we don't know how all of these programs are going to fit into the administration's Justice 40 goals, which aims to direct 40% of the benefits of federal investments to historically under-resourced and disenfranchised communities. Now, another important wrinkle in all of this is that the appropriations process is ongoing. The fiscal year 23 budget was passed last December, and right now the fiscal year 24 budget process is ongoing. But it's important to remember that for the IIJA in particular, a lot of the programs that I've mentioned, and I'm going to talk about a little more, weren't given all of their money up front. Formula funds, they got all the money for all 5 years that the IIJA is being enforced right at the get-go. Whereas for some of the discretionary grant programs, Congress has to give those money every year. So there's a chance that even though they could give those programs more money, they are not going to, which would be a loss for everybody on this call. And here you can see the president's proposed budget for fiscal year 24, which includes a large increase in the Federal Railroad Administration budget, but not too much of a change for the Federal Transit Administration or the Federal Highway Administration. Now I want to talk about the implications for New York specifically with regards to both formula funding and competitive grant programs. This is a big list. It includes a lot of the formula programs that New York is getting money from and how much money it is getting during this budget year. If you multiply all of these numbers by 5, that's how much New York is getting over the course of the IIJA. But it's important to note that the biggest pots of money here are the National Highway Performance Program, the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, and the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. Whereas some of the smaller programs that get a lot of attention, like the Carbon Reduction Program or the PROTECT program, which is about resilient transportation infrastructure, have much smaller buckets of money attached to them. There are some additional funding sources that are relevant. In terms of the Federal Highway Administration, there's the Reconnecting Communities program, which multiple cities in New York have already received grant awards from. There's the Congestion Relief Program, which can be used for good purposes. And there's also the PROTECT grants, in addition to PROTECT formula funds. And this grant actually, the notice of funding opportunity was released just a few hours ago. With respect to safety, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which dictates a lot of what your local traffic engineers can do without feeling like they will be liable for malpractice. That is going to be updated every 4 years, according to the IIJA, and we should have a new one for the first time in about a decade next month if things go according to plan. There's also the Safe Streets for All grant program, which I believe multiple municipalities in New York have also received funding from the first round of this program. And there are more rail and transit opportunities as well. For example, the Fed State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail is a new program, as well as increased funds for the CRISI grant, which is Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure and Safety Investments. And there's a lot of money now for the All Stations Accessibility Program, which is applicable to transit stops, as well as regional and passenger rail stops. And last but not least, for transit, there's a lot of money for both capital investment grants and the State of Good Repair Formula Program. So making sure that places like New York City can both build a Second Avenue subway and that other places throughout the state can ensure their infrastructure isn't crumbling at the same time. For the wide range of cities that have bus fleets, the Bus and Bus Facilities Grant is also an option. And more broadly, you can flex funding from the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program that is technically under the highways umbrella into transit-related projects. And I bring a lot of this state-level spending up because we might think of the real determinants in how our transportation system goes as the federal government and how much money it is willing to put into these programs. However, at scale, if you think about it, the biggest determinants to whether or not we're going to combat the climate crisis effectively, stop killing tens of thousands of people on our roads each year, and stop dividing communities are state and regional actors. In this case, NYSDOT and your MPO, if you have one, have a lot of say. And I bring this up especially for some of the state legislative staffers that I saw in the participants list today. There's a lot of action that can happen at the state level as well. One thing that comes to mind is a bill from Senator Gunardes, who I think is from Queens, if I remember correctly, to replace level of service, which is inherently biased towards cars and away from people, towards VMT as the way that the state prioritizes projects. And that's important for a host of climate reasons that I can go into during the Q&A session. Now, how do you take advantage of a lot of the funding opportunities that I've mentioned today? The first is to try to influence NYSDOT through your relationship with them and the plans that you have to write. There are new and better funded programs that they can and should be using proactively. The Transportation Alternative Set Aside is one of those that I mentioned. There's a metropolitan planning program that is a formula program which you can use to coordinate transportation with the other decisions that determine how effective our transportation infrastructure is. This includes land use, housing, and economic development, because really, if we are so spread out as we currently are right now in much of the country, then any transportation infrastructure is going to be inefficient and not climate friendly. There's also the PROTECT program, which I mentioned earlier. NYSDOT can and should be taking full advantage of all of these new programs or programs that have just gotten a lot more funding. And you should also be trying to get NYSDOT to ensure that a lot of the formula funds they get aren't being spent in more damaging ways. For instance, the carbon reduction program actually has a provision where half of its funds can go to projects that do not advance climate goals, that actually increase climate emissions. Making sure NISDOT doesn't do that is crucial. In addition, there are many formula funds that can be flexed away from highway projects towards transit, passenger rail, active transportation projects. And you should be looking at all of the avenues that you have on a local, regional, and even state level to try to get that to happen. And in addition, on a local level, try to maintain good relationships with the state and regional actors that I've mentioned. Be aware of and ready for grant opportunities. I will make sure that you get a link to the USDOT website that announces or that has a calendar for when a lot of these grants are going to be released, and act where you can. That means like passing a complete streets policy, working to do things within your power so that when the stars align above you at the regional, state, or federal level, you're ready. And also, if you have regional leaders that are advocating for policies that might be less popular, try to give them cover for tough moves, because honestly, as great as electric vehicles are, they're not going to save us in this climate crisis. If you want any more information on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we have a hub for that on Transportation for America's website. I encourage you to check that out. And now happy to go to the Q&A portion.
Well, thank you so much, Giancarlo, for your presentation, and really appreciate you giving the larger policy context here of just how much we're frankly up against in terms of the how much work there is to change the paradigm in transportation funding. So really appreciate you sharing that and all of the resources. So we have a number of questions, so we'll dive right in. The first question for Myra being on electric vehicles and vehicle types. This may be a more general question, but what is the current delivery time for current EV or hybrid vehicle types? And maybe if you could share more about how those intersect with the programs that you were talking about.
I don't have an answer for specific delivery time. It kind of varies depending on the manufacturer, where they're getting their supply from, et cetera, et cetera. In the recent past with COVID and all the supply chain issues, there was big delays. I don't know if that is still the case. I haven't gotten a whole lot of phone calls saying I'm waiting forever for my car. So what do I do? So I think that has been alleviated somewhat. I don't know if Tara has any additional information on that.
I don't. I echo the same thing. Basically, there was some communities that were really facing a long backlog, but I do think that's clearing up a little bit. I just don't have a timeline for what they're expecting if they went out today, to purchase. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. And a question for Tara from Ronnie. Have there been, or do you foresee any issues with utility providers supporting EV charging stations at the regional or municipal level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't, because, I think it really I think the big piece of it is usually the connectivity to the charging station if it's a smart station. So I've had some very rural communities installing charging stations in some very rural areas, trailheads and things like that, as long as they can get the electric for a level 2 station, I should mention, out there. But sometimes they have trouble with cell signals to get the station kind of like connected and, able to talk to people and people to be able to pay. Level 3 stations are an entirely different situation where you kind of have to have those phase 3 lines and a bit more grid capacity. So that's maybe where the utility connections play in a bit more, but we haven't seen as many of those. So Myra, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I would agree. I mean, I've seen similar installs at trailheads, et cetera. I mean, level 2s is somewhat fairly simple. You can pretty much put them anywhere where you have an electric line, but definitely the DC fast chargers are a little more involved. They involve adding a lot of infrastructure, essentially, even if you're in a metro area.
Wonderful, great. Here's a question, open up to the three of you. What percentage should we expect to pay for charging stations? So for example, if they're looking at 5 total charging stations with 2 ports for a total of 10, what would a municipality expect to pay for that?
Usually stations are looking at around the quote from an installer for a 2-port level 2 is like 15,000 to 20,000 on average is what I've seen for quotes. And then obviously multiply that by the number of stations, actually the number of 2-port stations. I've heard in the past level 3s are around 30,000, but that of course those prices may have gone up in the last year or two since I've seen that quote.
I would say it depends a lot on the site work that needs to be done. You know, if you're just running a line, an electric line in a parking garage, you're going to be spending a lot less money than if you're having to dig and trench and add poles and meters and that type of stuff. I think the average spending for municipalities on our program is around 23,000 per project. But again, that varies a lot. You know, if you're on Long Island, your costs are going to be a lot higher than if you're in Pulaski. So there's that to take into consideration as well.
Thank you. A question from Peter for Giancarlo, asking about the state DOT and about the control that they have on federal money, and in particular, section 7 of the state climate law requiring DOT to align spending decisions with the climate law and have a consistency. Do you have any specific insight into whether those provisions do provide some constraints on DOT and how they administer the funds?
So I'm not sure in this particular case, and I think there is a lot of flexibility there. I know that in Colorado, they actually passed a rule for their MPOs that sounds similar to Section 7 of the state climate law, but it was very, very enforceable, and it has already led to highway expansion projects being canceled. And I think that would be one sign of Section 7 of the New York State climate law being effective, is when projects that have been in an MPO's transportation improvement plan or long range plan for a really long time, like decades, or the state's transportation improvement plan for decades, start getting canceled because they are going to increase greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not sure about Section 7 specifically, but I do know that there are highway expansions occurring in New York State that give me pause about its efficacy, and making sure that it actually sticks to the letter of the law is a crucial thing for advocates across the state to do, and anybody who doesn't want to live through climate catastrophe.
Eloquently said. Here's a question we could open up for the three of you again, which is, what opportunities are there specifically for disadvantaged communities, and that maybe either in the programs that you talked about or other programs that communities can look into?
Well, I'll just highlight the piece that Myra talked about with the ZEB grants, and just that there's this kind of if you put a station in a disadvantaged tract or area, then there's no match, but also potentially more opportunity for funding for your community, because you're kind of, I don't know about this, but I think there's a different set of funding, or you're prioritized, but basically you're more likely to get that money in there for your match. So huge benefit there in that case.
Yeah, I mean, disadvantaged communities, I think, are going to benefit in many different ways from the, more EVs on the road, because they're less polluting overall. So, the less those things you have driving on the highways, the cleaner your air is going to be. And already the disadvantaged communities already have, they have most of the highways, they have most of the parking lots, they sort of have all that area that's getting highly polluted. So I think the switch to EVs and more public transportation and cleaner public transportation is going to help them overall, regardless of where the cars are or where the stations are. So I think that's really one probably the biggest benefit they're going to see. It's going to take some time as the changeover happens and the air clears out, but that's probably the biggest benefit, I would see from where I am. Definitely municipalities that have the disadvantaged community census tracts, they have the opportunity to either receive less match or different funding, more funding, depending on the programs.
I'll add at a federal level that the administration released a list of programs that they are looking to cover with the Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of benefits are aimed at disadvantaged communities. So if you're looking to target your efforts for where you're applying to grants, especially, if you are a capacity constrained locality, I would recommend looking at those grant programs first.
Wonderful. Great. We have time, I think, for one last question, and this will maybe is a good way to close. And that goes back to Giancarlo, your presentation around priority in transportation. The question specifically was, how can we make sure that we introduce more transit and go away from car-based transportation, and particularly much of upstate New York? Much of New York State is rural. So how can we do that? And maybe we can just do a go around close with your ideas, each of you, on how we can use this historic federal and state funding to help move us in a climate positive direction for the state.
Yeah, so in terms of transit in rural areas, we have some resources on our website that are specifically devoted to that. And I think there are a few case studies that I would kind of point to as exemplary. And depending on what you mean by rural area, but I'm thinking like anchored by a town or a smaller city. I would look at Missoula, Montana, which has not only been expanding their transit service for several years now, but has been fare-free and is almost entirely electric as a transit service for several years. And they have done that by working with the university that is located there and ensuring that other stakeholders in the community are investing in the transit system and getting the benefits of people being able to move freely throughout the community. So that is what I would say on that. And I think that also kind of serves as a good roundup for everything I've said today.
Myra, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I think that, a lot of these programs that I work on, specifically in the state's programs focused on municipalities, kind of encourage municipalities to lead by example, like install their own fleets, transition their own fleets, install infrastructure, kind of set up their communities for success so that residents can then see, that the municipality is doing it. It's definitely feasible, and, that they can do it too, encouraging businesses and residents to do the same. So it's a historic time, like you said, for funding. Now is the time to kind of get this stuff started and start to make the transition. So
I would also add that joint community planning is also a good piece, or it's kind of like the missing piece sometimes. Communities will do comp plans or transportation plans, and they're just kind of looking in their little box of their municipality, where we want to kind of try to spread that out a little bit so that the village is working with the town and a couple of towns are working with the county. So you can start getting a little bit of a more regional picture of how folks move around and how the different municipalities kind of need to work together to make decisions that's going to be the best for the entire region, as opposed to just focusing within their boundaries, especially when it comes to transportation.
Wonderful. Well, a huge thanks to all of our presenters, Giancarlo and Cara and Myra, for your insightful presentations. I certainly learned a lot, and I know a lot of our elected officials have as well, because we keep getting messages asking to send out the slides and presentations. So we'll be sure to do that. I want to thank, again, all of our panelists and all of our participants today for this webinar with Elected Officials to Protect America, and we'll follow up with resources again soon. Thank you so much, everyone.